Welcome to Curious Life of a Childfree Woman, a podcast celebrating unexpected choices, honest conversations, and the infinite possibilities of a happy, child-free life. I'm your host, Emily Paulsen. Each week, we'll meet inspiring guests, pushing boundaries, leading change, and redefining personal fulfillment. This is not about comparison, it's about possibility. Whether you're child-free by choice, circumstance, still deciding, or simply interested in fresh perspectives for limitless living, I am so happy you're here. Let's get curious together. Thank you for joining me for Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman. I am over the moon excited to welcome today's guest, Alexandra Raquel, also goes by Alex, how I lovingly refer to her, who is on a mission to help women create a life of deep belonging and connectedness through soul work. Alex is an ordained priestess and ceremonialist who's been leading sacred women's circles and ceremony for over a decade. She is also an ethical messaging strategist, specializing in high converting copy that's emotionally resonant and regulating for female founders who want profit and impact without sacrificing their values. Alex has a degree in environmental studies, an MPhil in developmental studies. She's lived on 4 continents, speaks 4 languages, and currently lives and works on the shared territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples, now known as C. Tuckeranto, aka Toronto. Welcome, Alex.
What a privilege and honor it is to be here, Emily. I'm so delighted and thrilled and excited. And I think I used the word honored already, but I'm just going to say it again. What a privilege it is to be on your podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that you're here. And I'm going to jump right in because there are so many big, beautiful words in your introduction. And I already have a lot of questions about exactly how you bring this work to life. So I said at the very beginning that you're on a mission to help women through this deep belonging and connectedness, and you accomplish that through soul work. What is soul work?
Thanks for the question and thanks for the beautiful introduction as well. So here's what I believe. I believe that we aren't just a part of nature, we are nature. And I also believe that the earth is our mother or the mother of life, so to speak. And because we are her, she speaks to us through our bodies, the avenue being intuition or what I call our soul's voice, right? I also believe that right now, given the dire situation, she's calling us in these times to help her, to heal her, and all her children. So, because so many of us have been conditioned through time, let's just say, like over the last few thousand years, to live from the head up, enlightenment, rationalization, science, and have also at the same time strongly been discouraged to suppress our intuitive nature and our body-led messages. Our intuitive muscles or soul voices have weakened. And soul work is the building up of that muscle. So it's accessing that internal voice of divine feminine wisdom. It's being able to hear what the Great Mother is telling us. It's waking her up inside of us. It's an ancient knowing from within that can guide us in making choices and taking action in our lives. So in other words, soul work is really the work it takes to access her, capital H, divine instructions through learning how to listen and trust her, to trust our gut. That's how I would define soul work. And it feels like, I mean, you've experienced it, but it feels like a very introspective process that can feel quite transformative as well. And it is rooted, in my experience, in ritual and ceremony, tapping into like innate spiritual and emotional energies and unlocking the capacity for growth, self-compassion, and aligned self-expression.
Okay, you said so many things that I want in my life. But yeah, I immediately feel this. I don't want to say disconnect, but I hear that and I think that sounds beautiful. This whole idea of intuition is something that I think has come up a lot in conversations that I'm in and circles that I'm in. And of course, we have this kind of rhetoric around female intuition. I think people think women in particular either are or should be connected to this sort of inner knowing. But at the same time, as women, we live in the real world, and there are all of these different roles that we are expected to play or that we expect ourselves to play. We're kind of shoved in all these different directions. I mean, that speech from the Barbie movie went viral, and it went viral for a reason. I think women everywhere were like, yes, exactly. We feel like we can't necessarily get it right. Like, we're supposed to be this really nice girl, but we're supposed to be really successful. All these different things that we get boxed into or that it feels that way in society. So, understanding that reality where we're kind of, as you said, in our head, trying to play all these parts every day and accomplish all this stuff, how do we even hear our intuition at the same time?
I think it is a muscle, Emily. I really think it's a muscle. And we do live in a world that is so overwhelming and stimulating. The way that one builds that muscle is like you build any muscle, it's through practice. And so finding spaces, finding moments in time when you can dive into it and practice, which in a sense is what meditation is, but just taking a sacred pause, taking a moment to tune into your body and maybe to do a body scan, to tune into the thoughts and to be able to kind of separate yourself from them a little bit so that you're recognizing that your mind, its job is to be on full time, right?
Mhm,
Its job is to ask the questions. That is what has kept us safe. And also, there's a body, and that has important messages. Like the idea really is to have them both work together. I believe that our intuition leads, and then the masculine energy, and I know we're going to talk about that in a little while. The masculine energy follows and supports the lead, the intuitive lead, right?
mhm,
But we've come to a place in our world where we do the opposite. In fact, the intuition hardly has anything to say. It's
mhm,
just our brain following external messaging, external instructions, let's say, and moving forward accordingly, ignoring completely what our body is telling us. And if we think about hustle culture, if we think about like perpetual productivity that is sort of expected of us in a capitalist culture, then we remember that that's exactly what the brain, the mind, the neck up is instructing us to
mhm.
overwork. And that the body, even if it's exhausted, we've got all these wonderful tools at our disposal, like coffee and Red Bull to keep us going,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, push
So
through.
push through, keep on going. So I really do think that a first initial step is about quieting our worlds and so that we can just have that space open inside of us to hear.
Yes. I feel like there's so much power there, but when as I don't know, type A overachiever, like whatever Enneagram human design that will like absolutely acquiesce to hustle culture immediately, I am that type of person. So even to hear you say slow pause gives me a little bit like I can feel my muscles tense up, like this whole idea of productivity has been so drilled into us because we live in a capitalist society, and there's a lot of upside to that, right? Like, I love ending a day and feeling like I was really productive. It's almost like it's not almost like, it is like I'm scared that if I do embrace some type of pause or break or space, that I'll just instantly start falling behind everybody who isn't doing that, even if they're sacrificing their well being or, having 14 cups of coffee a day. I have this fear that if I'm not working at that pace, I'm not going to get the same success or the same result or have the same impact or whatever. Understanding that maybe that's partially coming from me, maybe it's somewhat nature, somewhat nurture. Like, what do we do? How do we combat that if we want to achieve really huge goals and we feel like all we've ever seen to get there is kind of going all in and pushing through no matter what? But we see problems with that too, and we want to embrace the next level emotional lifestyle. Like, how do those worlds work together?
Yeah. I think one piece that's really important is to recognize that a lot of this is by design. That fear that you talk about, or the discomfort maybe of slowing down and like,
Mhm.
just the fear associated with not being able to get to where you want to go. Or I had one woman that I worked with once, and she was scared that if she stopped, she would never start again.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and I think that all of this, like I said, is by design. If we aren't busy all the time, heaven forbid, we may start to feel things that are uncomfortable. We may start to realize thought patterns that aren't actually really supportive. And all of that would mean questions. So, keeping us busy, keeping us numbed out. Is it Brene Brown that talks about busyness as being like a major societal numbing tool?
Mhm.
Be crazy busy is a way of just keeping us in our heads, going. I think the other piece of this puzzle is really that so we see other people apparently being perpetually productive, apparently reaching their goals. What we don't see is that they've had 3 divorces along the way, or that they're on high levels of high anxiety, antidepressant medication, or that, once they do make their first 7 figures, they're actually feeling a little bit blah about it. And so that's when they go for 8 figures.
Mm.
I mean, we don't see the whole truth behind these American dream success stories, but what we do see is a mental health crisis, a physical health crisis, environmental catastrophe happening. And a lot of that, I believe, is pointing to a non sustainable way of being, relating to our bodies and relating to the earth. We're behaving like machines and we're not machines. And we can't keep going like this. I mean, all the signs are there and they've been there for a while. We just keep on moving, following this shiny object, right? That
Mhm.
we can't quite reach. I think that it really is about zooming out and recognizing again, I'll go back to that. We are nature. We actually work like organic beings. We have cycles. We're part of a much larger, eloquent, sophisticated system that keeps life alive and that's kept life alive. We've been on this planet as human species for 7 to 10 million years, billion years. And here we are after 3, 4, 5,000 years of, well, I can go into the history of patriarchy, but like 3, 4, 5 between that and 12,000 years of patriarchy. And we find ourselves in this environmental crisis, which
Mhm.
is not only about the planet, it's about us and our survival as well. So, what we see through media, even maybe when we go visit the Joneses next door, is not the whole story. I just don't think we can keep going the way we're going.
I agree. I think you just raised so many important points. One of the things that you have taught me a lot about through our work together and through me being in sacred women's circles with you and just getting to know you is the connectedness between people and nature and how in opposition that is with us trying to be machines. And it sounds like when you say that out loud, it almost sounds simple. Like, well, of course, we're not a machine, especially in the day of AI and all these things. It's like this separation. I feel like we, especially as creative humans, are almost starting to justify how different we are from machines. But in the way that we've been behaving, that is the expectation. And if we think about the way a tree grows or the changing of the seasons, like we've just accepted that that is the pace generally. We have manipulated nature in other circumstances to kind of make it run on our timeline. But we just can't seem to connect the dots between the way the natural world wants us to exist and this idea of space and pausing and rest and recalibrating and recharging and all of the things that happen in the natural world. We just seem to keep pushing through that no matter what. I go to a nutrition therapist now, which is something new I've started over the past several months. And I was just with him this morning, and he is well versed with my affinity for productivity and trying to push myself to the brink. And, there's all these symptoms I've created just for myself and the way I have a relationship with food, with my work, all of these things kind of as a result of me living that way. And today he said to me, for you, space is the medicine. And it's just like these small things. Like when I listen to you say, humans aren't a machine, we're organic matter. And when he says to me, for you, space is the medicine, it's so counterintuitive to the things that I've been taught before, or frankly, the things that have worked for me when I think about goals that I've achieved or accolades I got at work or whatever, kind of these pieces of the American dream, as you said, that I'm trying to accumulate. reminds me of another piece of that, the whole idea of the traditional path of being a parent. I am not taking that path. If the name of this podcast and the cover of this podcast is not screaming enough that I am child free by choice, I feel like sometimes there's even more of a gap for people in our position because there's so many conversations that I have, especially with women in business, where it's like having kids is the catalyst for slowing down because then you have no choice. The baby has its own timeline and the sleep schedule is totally different. And the emotional side of wanting to take time off of work, needing to take time off of work, all of those things. So, for people who aren't having children or maybe embracing that more traditional lifestyle, sometimes I feel like, well, what is going to be my brick wall where I think, okay, for real, for me now, I have to inject space. What can you share to help me and other child free people who aren't going to have that big kind of lifestyle shift that forces them into some of these boundaries? How can I force myself?
I would look to nature. I mean, I would look within and look to nature. So it really is about tuning in to your body. I was going to say, because sometimes we think tuning in and we think of our mind tuning into something, right? But tuning in to our bodies and honoring the cycles. So if we look at anything alive, and even the moon, which we could argue is not alive, right? Everything has a cycle. So we have that cycle of birth and then growth and maturity and peak, and then a decline and then a death. And so, in what I call the cycle, and I don't call it the creative cycle because there's also a destructive element to it. I just call it the cycle. Those four phases are synonymous to what happens in our bodies naturally. So a woman's body will have her follicular phase and then ovulatory and then luteal and then menstrual, the bleeding part of her cycle. And that is all aligned with the moon that has its waxing phase, its full moon phase, waning. And look at the seasons, right? We find ourselves in the fall, and then we're going to be in winter, spring, which is synonymous with birth and fresh starts, summer, which is synonymous with the full moon or ovulatory phase. So there are these four phases. And what happens in our world where perpetual productivity is supported or encouraged, or let's just say we're just conditioned to believe that it's the only thing in a lot of places. And I think it's important also to note like where we find ourselves geographically. We are in North America. This ethos is really strong. My husband is European. I've spent a lot of time in Europe. I've lived in Europe for a really long time. I've also lived in Southern Africa. I've also lived in Brazil. I've lived in lots of places, and the relationship to hustle is different, right? So I think internationally, it's important for us to recognize that this is sort of the cultural soup we happen to be swimming in. But if just going back to the cycle piece, spring and summer are the most celebrated, whereas fall and winter less so. And what's really interesting about these different phases is that they're also aligned to masculine and feminine energy. And I can speak to that in a second. But what I would propose for any woman on the planet is really to recognize that in her body, even within a day, there will be those four phases. There's the wake up, there's the peak, then there's the, oh, I'm starting to feel a little bit tired. My moon is waning, my body's waning. And then there's the rest, right? So there are phases in our day. And what we need to do is to tune into our body and feel when that rest is calling, when the wind down is calling. Because if we want something to be sustainable and regenerative, any project in our lives at all, we need to rest. And we need also to take the time. Fall is a wonderful time for us to look around and remember to release, to let go, to allow things to just wash away and to be quite discerning. If we look at the woman's cycle, the times that have been so taboo and least talked about are the luteal and the bleeding phase, the menstrual phase. Those are the times when women become naturally a little bit more discerning, or AKA bitchy, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I have to put up with that. I don't want to have to put up. You're more sensitive to what's
Mm.
going on around you. And that has not been celebrated in any way, but it's super important for us to have a time when we know we can reflect on what's working for us and what isn't. And that can be during our luteal cycle, that can be during the waning moon, that can be in the full, that can be towards the end of the day. When we look back on our day and we're like, okay, that worked, that worked, that worked, never doing that again. All right, letting that go. Goodbye, desk. And now my body's asking for rest, right? Like that kind of small ritual that you can just integrate into your life that in a way honors the cycles that allow for us to do what we need to do in order to wake up bright eyed and energized for the next day. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's so helpful for somebody like me who is trying to understand more about intuition and energy, and it can feel so huge. And then I'm like, okay, well, let me just sit still for a second and try to hear my intuition. And, like, how's that going to work? But to break it down and bring it all the way into a 24-hour period is so helpful to me. And as you said, with nature, like if I think, okay, we cannot have spring without winter. I happen to be somebody who's obsessed with winter and fall and, not as thrilled when everybody else is pumped up with spring and summer. We can clearly see why all of those things happen, why they happen in the right timeline. Like you cannot have one without the others. So that makes it feel, it's like it gives it a sense of importance for me to embrace it as an individual, as a living organic person, because I see that I can use that as an example of why all pieces are necessary. So helpful. On this same vein, this idea of feminine and masculine energy, I hear this talked about. I think the natural inclination for those of us who don't really understand it is to think like male, female, which is not necessarily what it means. So, just what is feminine and masculine energy?
That's a really important question because the assumption is often, when you say feminine, it's about women. And when you say masculine, it's about men. What we're talking about is different energetics. And it was Jung, actually, Carl Jung, who came up with these terms and kind of put them in these categories. If I knew more about Asian philosophy and religion, then I could speak to the yin and yang a little bit more. But it's the same thing. Like the yin type of energy is that feminine energy, and the yang type of energy is that masculine energy. And the reason I always bring in the yin and the yang is just so that people understand a, that this is kind of like an international framework or concept, but B, it helps us to separate the word feminine from female and masculine from male. And what these energies are distinct sort of types of energies that exist inside both men and women. And it's not about one being better than the other. It's more about finding a balance between the healthy feminine energy and the healthy masculine energy. And so let me give examples of maybe what feminine energy is and what masculine energy is. So feminine energy might be considered, or yin energy might be considered what we've been talking about, like the intuitive side of us, kind of being in the flow, creating, nurturing, caring. There's sort of a softer feel to it. I just want to say again, men can hold this energy and should, and we need them to, and women too. And I think I want to talk a little bit about like not only the concept of masculine and feminine, but the lived experience of masculine and feminine. So anyway, so those are kind
Please.
of like the sort of words that I might associate with the feminine. And then with the masculine, I would use words like productivity, doing, asserting, action, structure, systems, whereas the feminine is the flow. So the masculine might be the riverbed and the feminine is the water flowing through it.
Okay.
It's a
Visuals.
yeah, a nice little picture. But I think what's happened, and we've alluded to this throughout the conversation, is that today's society is shaped in an imbalanced way. It's shaped by an imbalance that favors masculine energy over feminine energy. That's what we've been talking about, right? Perpetual productivity. And
Hmm.
this is a situation that's deeply rooted in history and perpetuated by our cultural systems, right? So we live in a world that idealizes the masculine attributes like productivity, logic, structure, dominance, and undervaluing those qualities of intuition, rest, cyclical wisdom, deep relational connection, collectivity versus individuality, right? And in order to understand this imbalance, we need to look back a little bit because it's been built over centuries at patriarchal structures, beginning with early hierarchies. They were reinforced through shifts in religious and cultural practices. And gradually, all of this erased feminine wisdom from our collective understandings. The wisdom of the feminine wasn't only repressed, but it was actually actively erased and replaced by systems that taught us to prize masculine attributes as inherently more valuable. And so the result is this society that we've been talking about that equates worth with accomplishment, praises constant productivity, values transactional relationships over like true deep connections. And like I said, this hyper focus on perpetual spring and summer energy, right? We're always growing, always producing, always doing, leaving such little room for your favorite seasons,
Mhm.
that call us to pause and rest and reflect and release. So the impact is, again, what we've been talking about: burnout, disconnection from ourselves, a profound disconnection from the rhythms of our bodies and the rhythms of nature. What I really propose through my work is a new paradigm, one that honors and values both the feminine and masculine energies equally, and that we start seeing worth beyond. I was at a beautiful workshop, and no, it wasn't a workshop. It was an event I went to this weekend. And one of the panelists, or one of the presenters, she put a photo of a baby up and she said, "Is this baby worthy of anything?"
Whoa.
And yeah, right.
Heartstrings, like, yeah, what a play.
Yeah, of course there's an inherent worth in all of us because we were all babies. We're all human beings. There's this inherent worth. Yet society only gives value once we produce something.
Mhm.
And speaking to the curious life of a child-free woman, for women, that production has often been a child,
Yes,
right?
definitely. Yes, like that value, that, kind of check the box that you have contributed that to the world and to society, I feel like is just sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, but a ubiquitous storyline through society.
Absolutely. I think that this divine feminine energy, or it gets confused with being a mother.
Yes, absolutely. Nurturing, maternal, all of those things. And it's almost to the point as a child free person, if somebody meets me and we get to know each other and then they find out that I don't want to have children, if they see me as at all nurturing or kind, they're like, oh, what a shame. You would be such a good mom, because we've just put those attributes hand in hand, like somebody having that warmth or that flow, that kind of ability to embrace and empathy and all of those things. We just equate that in so many circumstances with motherhood, not with just being a whole person. And as you said, we want men to have this energy too. We want them to express this side of themselves. It certainly isn't about one gender and it's not about being a parent or not being a parent.
Absolutely. And, I've heard it said that the feminine, there's this paradigm of universal motherhood, right? Like the divine feminine. And I referred to it, I said, the earth is our mother, and she is also the divine feminine. But we mustn't let that word mother throw us off, because everyone can access that,
Hmm.
regardless of their gender, what you just said. And I think that we really need to think of it again, like energetically, right? Find that access to qualities of receptivity, patience, ability to listen, and care for all of life, not just the
Hmm.
baby that pops out of us, right? I mean, that feminine energy is about caring for everything that is around us, plants, trees, our friends included.
Mm.
It's all kitty cats,
Mm.
like everything,
Yes.
everything. It really is about that caring piece of the puzzle, that nurturing piece of the puzzle that we bring to the world. And I really don't think church or monotheism has done us many favors. And I can speak to Christianity, specifically Catholicism, because I was exposed to that as a child. But, our spiritual blueprint for women is limited to a very small number of archetypes who have been contrasted against each other. And principally for Christians, we've got the Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene. If we go back even further in time and we look at goddess culture, we see that there were so many other archetypes. There were warrior archetypes. There were lovers, mothers. Yes. There were queens. There were crones. There were maidens. There were shapeshifters. There were Medusas. Like, there was everything, and so you had different role models to look up to. Like, what would it look like for us if there was this plethora of female deities and we could say, "You know what? I need to draw on some of that badass warrior energy today."
Mhm.
And not just like, "How do I be the good woman and mother that I was meant to be?" Right? They call the goddess she of a thousand names. because she existed prehistorically all over the world in all different forms with thousands and thousands of different names. But everybody like all these different cultures worshiped her for tens of thousands of years because it was from her that life was born and
Mhm.
maintained. It just makes so much sense.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so beautifully diverse to have, as you said, these different archetypes, these different role models. It's crazy to me that that's where we started. And then there's all these different points in history where the story was changed or it was written from a very specific perspective. And we have what you just described with both of the Marys, Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene. And then I'm thinking about the Sex and the City movie from just a few years ago where they're shopping for Halloween costumes. And it's like, we have two options, witch or sexy kitten. She's like, oh, you just said a mouthful there. It's like we are getting, if nothing else, even more narrow. Or it feels that way in the way that we're portrayed or the way we see ourselves. So if we are frustrated by that, but we want to do something about it and start to shift, whether it's however you want to think about it, breaking down the patriarchy or just living life as an individual a little bit more on our own terms, like thinking about these cultural changes that we would like to see and wanting to be part of them. We've talked a lot about, I think, what we can do as individual women, going inward more, taking more space, having that pause, kind of maybe questioning the productivity, hustle, mess, and giving ourselves breathing room to hear our own inner voice. Beyond that, what role does partnership or community play in helping us get back to this place of a lot of diverse, beautiful capacity for women to fill?
I think that one of the feminine values is community and connection. But we live and have been raised in these isolated nuclear family units. And when we live in isolation, we only know what we know. So we do what we've done and what we've been taught is the right thing to do. It's like, I call it shoulditis. And it's important for us to remember that this traditional nuclear family and this emphasis on individualism or being the individual serves the broader social system as it exists today. So it's the nuclear family is the ideal unit for capitalist production. If you think about it, the woman produces human capital and the man produces the non-human capital that not only continues to support her to continue to make babies, but also is contributing to a broader system.
Mhm.
And as they're both so busy producing what they're producing in isolation, there isn't really, again, being busy, there
Mhm.
isn't that much time to question things, right? And one's work is making the other works possible, but all of it's in the confines of shoulditis, what I should be, and very little time to have those internal conversations. And I can say this as a mother, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you've witnessed it, the community and the village to support the work of the family has disappeared. And individualism has become like this toxic focus. And success is defined through your individual story and the way your individual family unit presents itself through material accumulation. But what we've come to see is that none of it is working for us. We're getting sick. The earth is getting sick because we aren't individuals. We're communal beings. Of course we are. We're nature. We're interdependent on one another. And so I think it's natural to come into community. And I think that women are more attuned to that because historically we've had to do it. We've had to go get the water together.
Mm.
We had to, pre nuclear family, we have had to have villages in order to lean on one another, right? I think like the individualistic piece is really about the demise of feminine ways of living and sharing in collectives and forgetting that when one is lifted, we are all lifted, that when one cries, we all feel the pain, and that freedom only exists when we all experience it. So even the nature, and you know this, the nature of the work I do, the ceremonial work that I do, it draws on that. It draws on the communal piece. It draws on the feminine tools of circling together, of bringing women together to heal together. And that is an ancient art, an ancient practice. And as we trailblaze, particularly as we trailblaze like this new world that we are creating. It's an assumption to your listeners, maybe that we're all here to create a new world, but I know you and I are here to create a new world.
No, we're doing great. We're getting curious. We're learning. We're exploring new ways of thinking about things.
Exactly. And curiosity is the perfect word because you can't really play with curiosity by yourself. It kind of involves having a conversation and
Mm,
sharing that curiosity with other people and making mistakes together that are maybe born of that curiosity or celebrating the wins that are born of that curiosity, right? Lifting one another up as we find our way along this path and talking ourselves and walking ourselves and holding ourselves through the mess, crying together, raging, loving, dancing together. And I think that COVID, if there wasn't a bigger message around the importance of coming together and being in contact and in community, I mean, if we didn't hear that message then, I don't think we're ever going to hear it because as humans, it just became so clear that
mhm.
we needed it. I think it's also important. Like, I always remember that during the witch hunts and the witch trials, women were not allowed to gather.
We're
They
too
also weren't
dangerous together.
too
Can't.
dangerous together. They also, incidentally, weren't allowed to wear lipstick. I thought that was really interesting. But anyway, keeping
The,
us apart and isolated was strategic.
ugh.
It wasn't random. And so being in community, coming in circle to heal together is a reclaiming.
Yeah, that witch comment makes me wanna throw a slumber party right now, just to prove a point that we can gather and do cool things. And yeah, I have certainly experienced that. I think what you just said about curiosity is important too. Like when I started talking about the concept for this, a couple people were like, "Oh, so is it just gonna be you talking? Are you gonna interview people?" And I was like, I can't learn anything if I'm just sitting here by myself talking into the void of the internet. It's all about conversation and other people's perspectives and opinions and ideas and ways of looking at things. And I can speak from experience working with you. I think it's almost like a duality of individualism and community. And I think, at least for me, if I look back at my life, you go through these phases when you're growing up and you want to be more like everybody else. And you try to kind of hide or shush the things about you that are weird or unique or quirky or whatever. And then you grow up and you start to embrace those things. And then it's like you want to be known as an individual and not be doing what all your friends are doing or what everybody else is doing. You kind of want to stand out and have things that are all your own, but you're still on your own. And I've experienced that the next level of feeling so in touch with yourself, but just more kind of alive and supported from the inside out, is having a community where you can bring your individuality into it and celebrate the things about yourself that are weird or quirky or unusual or whatever openly with other people. That experience has really blown my mind, even as somebody who's had great relationships with women my whole life. And I feel really lucky for that. I know a lot of women haven't had that experience, but I've always had female friends and been in 4-H and cheerleading, been around these girls. But being able to do that as women, the more we know ourselves and the more we can have that emotional release as one, it's been life changing for me in the way I relate to myself and the way I relate to nature and to other people, male and female. So, on that note, tell everybody for people who want that same earth shattering experience, how can people connect with you to learn more about the impact that you're having, how they can learn more from you, about you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Can I just add one more thing about circling before I jump into that?
Of course.
I was at a circle on a few days ago, and there was a moment of sharing, which I
Mm,
think is sometimes the most potent part of circling or ceremony. And what the leader said, she said, she's a dear friend and a priestess. She said, always when you share, someone else is going to get something out of it. And so I'm speaking to like your experience of taking your lived experience to the next level through sharing
mm,
with your sisters. There's really something remarkable that happens because we remember that we aren't in isolation, that what we experience is so similar to what they are experiencing. I mean, it's not always the same, but there's always an inkling of something that's like, oh, wow,
mhm,
I'm actually not alone in this. And
mhm,
it's especially true in the female identifying experience on a patriarchal planet. When I think about like the patriarchy and I think about women and men's experience, huge generalization. I know there's a whole lot in between. I feel so blessed to be a woman because we have community. And I look at men that I know in my generation, just to be transparent, I'm 51. A lot of them, they're actually experiencing a mental crisis, like suicide rates and depression rates for that demographic are through the roof. And
Mhm.
I think it's really because they're alone. We are so lucky to have each other when we do have each other. And like you say, you're blessed. I'm blessed in that way. I think something that is strengthening us and allow and making possible moving forward in leadership roles as women. The fact
Love
that we come together to do it and to share.
I love that.
Yeah. I'm so excited to share with your listeners that I'm building a brand called Conectada. It means connected. It's fairly obvious, but I'll just say it just in case it means connected in Spanish. And it's all about everything that we talked about today. So it's about helping women to connect with their bodies, with the earth, with their internal compass and deep seated wisdom that I believe is their soul voice, right? And so I help them to access these divine instructions from the goddess by building up their intuitive muscle and accessing that soul voice by embodying their earth and soul sourced power. And I do this through a modality born of ancient feminine wisdom that I've talked about called ceremony. So I lead in-person ceremonies here in Toronto on the solstices and the equinoxes. And I do it at that time because those are these energetic portal moments of transition during the year, very powerful energies at that time. I also lead personal ceremonies or private ceremonies, usually for very ambitious, creative women like yourselves, lots of entrepreneurs who find themselves on a consistent sort of path of up leveling and expansion, which is what women who are here to make a difference through their creations are interested in and are doing and need to do. I also do one-on-one ceremonies where I draw on beyond quantum healing modality to help my clients access their souls through a ceremonial hypnosis session.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, and that's really fun. Someone described it as like a year's worth of therapy in half a day. So
Ah,
it's like pretty potent stuff.
scratching that productivity itch. Let's
Well,
do
that's the other thing, right? Is like we think that hustle and grind and go is going to get us somewhere, but from the sustainable, regenerative, and I believe like long lasting impact perspective, I really think that a more cyclical, compassionate body led approach is the answer. Some women hire me to lead ceremony and retreats for their masterminds or for their sister group. And yeah, if women are interested in actually integrating this kind of up leveling soul work into their lives on the regular, I lead a membership also called 13 Moves, where we meet online every full moon for a mini ceremony. And then there are also 4 annual online ceremonies that I offer. And one more thing.
Yes, please.
I'm super excited because I'm seeding right now a mentorship program that I'm going to be opening within the next year to help women who are actually interested in serving as ceremonial priestesses. And I'm also hostess of the Witch Hunt podcast.
You have so many things going on.
I
I
have so
love
many
it.
things going on. And the best way to find me is on Instagram. It's Alex_in essence. And if you want to reach out to me personally, I just love meeting people who are curious about this new way of perceiving the world and, living life. They can always email me at alexandra.hughes@gmail.com.
Perfect. Alex, thank you so much. I learn from you every single time we talk. You have such deep wisdom and expertise in all of the topics we've discussed, but also I just love your energy and your warmth and openness to welcome people in and really help us who don't fully understand all of these elements of the world. You do such a beautiful job of making it easy and exciting to explore. So thank you for sharing all of that with me and with the audience today.
Emily, it's been such a pleasure. It's always so great talking to you. And in different ways, you are my inspiration as well.
Oh
I
my
think we
gosh.
make, yeah, we're
Love
like love
fest.
fest.
Thank you so
We
much,
do.
Alex.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman. I did not really get this until I became a podcast host, but if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and consider taking 2 minutes to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Turns out, it really does make a difference. You can become a Curious Life insider at curiouslifeofachildfreewoman.com. Follow us on Instagram at Curious Life of a Child Free Woman And feel free to share this episode with a curious friend. Friendship is everything to me, so every recommendation really means the world. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and know that you'll never walk the child-free journey alone.